internet. My name is Matthew Kroll.
And you're tearing me apart, Matt.
No, it's the wrong room, Shahir. That's Shahir Dowd over there quoting The Room when this is the only podcast about the movie Room.
Oh, shit.
Did you watch the wrong film?
No, I'm just kidding. Yeah, I watched The Room, of course, with Brie Larson. I know what I'm talking about, but I still love The Room. Can we do an episode about The Room?
We should do it live, and we should do it in the theaters.
Oh, my God, it's so much fun.
But no, this is the only podcast about the film Room. Yes, with Brie Larson. And what's the kid's name, the actor?
Jerry Trump. It's... the kid who should have been nominated for an Oscar but wasn't.
Right, yes.
Jacob Tremblay.
Yeah, he 100% this kid should have been nominated for an Oscar.
He's pretty amazing in this movie.
This is a film we were turned on to by my girlfriend Robin told me about it as well, but also the wonderful friend of the show and brother from another mother, Stephen Buja of Same Night Movie Review fame. Turned us on to this, right, Shahir?
Yeah, he wrote us in. I'm going to read out his email because it's interesting. This email is specifically directed at me, and you'll hear why. So Steve says, "Hey guys, just listening to the year in review of the year in reviews. Shahir, you had mentioned movies you had not seen but wanted to, and chief among that list is Room. It's an incredible film and one that I'm particularly interested in hearing your opinion on it as it deals primarily with the themes of child raising and parenting. I can only look at it through a particular lens, that of a non-parent, and it still hit me like a ton of bricks. Looking forward to hearing your take on it. Keep on keeping on. Steve, P.S. Dear Shahir, stop being a dick." Thanks, Steve.
Yeah.
Much appreciated.
Yeah, that last part.
Yeah, Matt really enjoyed that last part. So, Room is a film adaptation of a book by Emma Donoghue, written by Emma Donoghue. And the IMDb synopsis is, after a 5-year-old Jack and his mother escape from the enclosed surroundings that Jack has known his entire life, the boy makes a thrilling discovery. Which is, that's an interesting
perspective, sure.
If you've read the book, you know what the story is about. And here's one of the annoying things: if you've watched the trailer, you know what the whole film is. I'm a strong advocate for not watching trailers anymore, and watching Room's trailer is a really good case study for not, because the surprises in the film are kind of given away by the trailer.
Here's the thing. This is something. So we're gonna kind of get into spoilers early on this, I think, only because the things that I truly like about the film can't be talked about without sort of spoilery territory. So I'll touch on what you just said after that fact. Is there anything you want to say before we actually do that? Like, I don't want to ruin stuff.
Okay, so general impressions for people who just want a quick impression of the movie. Yes, it's phenomenal. It's very beautifully made. The thing that I love particularly about this film is that it is a very small scale film. Yes. Like it's like literally set in a room and a couple of other rooms later on. But it never feels like it's limited by that, and it never feels like it was intentionally low budget or anything like that. It feels like this is the story they wanted to tell, which is set in these few rooms. So it feels limited by design.
Right.
And it's a film which starts one way and then blossoms into something else entirely. Mm-hmm. And it's held together by pretty amazing writing from Emma Donoghue, who's adapting her own novel. I haven't read the novel, but from what I've heard, the film it does a better job of communicating the themes of the novel. And Lenny Abrahamson, who was just nominated for Best Director for this film, does a phenomenal job of showing you the world from a child's perspective. In a really beautiful way, and this, and this is part and parcel with the performance of this child, Jacob Tremblay, which
has he done anything before this, or is this his first foray into greatness?
No, he has done things like the Smurfs movie, Gord's brother. I mean, he's actually slightly older than the role required. He's a 9-year-old, and the boy in the film is required to be.
Oh, then fuck it. No Oscar nom for you.
Well, it does because you do watch it. He does look like a 5-year-old, and you kind of think of him as a 5-year-old, and he's such an amazing performance.
Fun fact: I can't tell children's ages.
No, yeah, you're right. And the only reason I can slightly is that I've just had a young boy. But then again, that means the only ages I can tell are like 3 months versus 1 month. So
Sure, of course.
I think this is a phenomenal film. And here's one thing I would say. If you've seen The Lovely Bones and you've read The Lovely Bones as a film is terrible. And that's hard for me to say, being a New Zealand, patriot. Oh
my God, is this a New Zealand film that you don't like?
Yeah, I mean the Peter Jackson, for all his greatness, just completely misfires with The Lovely Bones. And and I've read the book The Lovely Bones, and The Lovely Bones as a book was supposed to be a film like this. This is a film about human drama. And that's not what The Lovely Bones was.
I feel like I should have introduced you as the synth who's wearing Shahir's skin at this point.
Oh, well, there are New Zealand films I don't like. But, the thing about The Lovely Bones is it should have been a small, intimate film about a family. And it wasn't. And Room is entirely a small, intimate film about a family.
Yep.
And every moment is thrilling. And it has a scene in it, which we're going to get into in spoilers, that had me on the edge of my seat. I can't think of another film this year that did that. Matt, what did you think of the film?
I thought it was a phenomenal time at the movies. I thought the story, for reasons I'll get into more later, but really built into something that was special in the headspace that this movie tries to fill. A lot of movies like this, I tend to think get too caught up in various aspects I find less interesting, and this one took the road less traveled, and in this case more interesting for me, just with the subject matter that the film wants to tackle and that feels is important. It also is a phenomenal sort of look at the idea of childhood and how, I guess, malleable or subjective you can get with an entity that is building itself to standard human intellect that has no point of reference whatsoever. It's sometimes an emotional kick to the nuts, and it has a lot of punch to it in various places that range from pure sort of adrenaline, oh my God, what's going to happen next, to sort of that feeling that you got when you found out that, again, this might be a minor spoiler for anybody, but that Santa Claus doesn't exist. It just felt it made you feel a lot of things that I remember from childhood over again, and it does so in a very clean and well done sort of way. So I mean, I would obviously say to go see it. I don't think there's. I can see my action movie popcorn brethren sort of watching this and being like, what the fuck? I can see that. But
it's not that kind of movie in any way, shape, or form.
No. If you like movies and you're a human being as opposed to a caricature, which I've sort of just described, you'll like this movie. It's a good movie.
If I'd seen this, if we'd seen this in our top, last year, it probably would have made our top 10s, right? I mean, it certainly would have made my top 10s.
I'd have to go. I mean, I think lower top 10s for me.
Yeah.
I think it does a lot of great stuff, and it does it well. And it's one of those things that stuck with you after you watched it. There's no question. But I don't know. I'd have to think about that further.
Steve, since you gave me the assignment of watching this movie, I'm going to give you one assignment back, which I'd love to hear your thoughts on. If you loved this movie, Room, and for anyone who watches Room and really enjoys it, there's a Japanese film that I loved. I watched it once. I remember watching it in a double hitter with V for Vendetta. I watched V for Vendetta and then this film, Nobody Knows, directed by Hirokazu Korida. And Nobody Knows, I forgot about V for Vendetta immediately, and Nobody Knows is a film I've watched 3 or 4 times since. And it deals with similar themes and a similar story to Room, so you kind of know what you're getting at. But it does this, it does that amazing thing, which is that it has child actors playing children who feel like genuine children. There's this problem in movies, which is that when you put kids in movies, it tends to feel like adults writing kids in movies.
Sure.
Room, I think, does a pretty amazing. Although Room might have some problems in terms of it, like gives you like the perfect child in some respect.
I think it gives you a pretty standard child.
I don't know. He seems kind of like. Shivali and I, my wife and I, watched this movie and we said, if our kid turns out that well adjusted, we'll be happy. And our kid didn't have to go through the trauma of what this kid has to go through.
The fun fact about this is, and now we're getting into spoiler territory. I'll say one thing before we get it. The kid himself doesn't really go through any trauma until a turning point in the movie, and then it's all sort of culture shock. But honestly, he doesn't understand anything that's happening.
He doesn't.
It's not like he had constant trauma throughout his life.
Yeah, it does. Okay. So before we move on, Steve, please watch Nobody Knows, which I think is still available on Netflix. If it's not, watch it, and if you aren't satisfied, I will pay for your rental.
Wow, that's a guarantee.
Yeah, it's a phenomenal film. On the point that you were talking about, there is a thing. Yeah, look, I loved this kid, and I was kind of like, it had that real paternal thing where I just, I wanted this kid to make it through this movie in any way, shape, or form, and I was so attached to him, and I think my wife was as well. But at the same time, he kind of felt like the perfect kid, like he really. I
disagree, but
well, okay, we'll get into that. But to your point, there's another film, Dogtooth. I'm not sure which country it came from. I feel like it's Greek.
New Zealand.
Which is about a similar thing, which is where parents teach their kids the wrong lesson, so they don't realize they're being traumatized. Like they don't realize that the harm that's being done to them is psychological harm, and they don't know it because they don't know anything else.
Right.
And I think that's what's happening in this film as well, which is that the harm that is being done to this kid is completely psychological, but he has no conception of how bad that harm is because he has no reference point.
But then there's the point, actually, honestly, then is it harm until a moment? But do you know what I mean? No,
it's completely 100% harm.
Well, it's dependent. Well, let's get into it. Let's go.
Should we get into spoilers?
Yeah,
at this
so
moment?
spoiler territory, 3, 2, 1. So what happens in this movie, just to break it down, because then I want to talk about how the movie handles the tropes as opposed to sort of, because I could give you the whole synopsis of sort of what happens very, very quickly. Brie Larson's character is a woman who has been kidnapped by a man called, the only name we get is from him, is Old Nick. And Old Nick has locked Brie Larson for the past 7 years in a shed in an unknown location until you find out later, and basically has been just holding her there against her will and raping her consistently for the past 7 years, which over the first 2 years ends with the birth of a child who she has in this one room. She never leaves this room. And she ends up, carrying through the child and raising the child and whatnot.
And the movie begins
when he turns 5.
Yeah.
So all this kid has known in his entire life is this one room. Now, I think what the story does to this point, and it makes it sort of very clear in the beginning, and I liked how they didn't exactly set up that it was a kidnapping at first. Like I didn't watch the trailer for this, so I didn't know.
So how was that when you did you?
I figured it was a kidnapping. It looked like a kidnapping. It had a skylight and sound foam on the ceiling when she looked up at it, and it looked sort of dingy and whatever. But I'm like, wow, this could be a fallout shelter. Yeah. This could be something else. This could be the new Cloverfield movie. Yeah. But and then, it comes to terms that you realize that it's actually a kidnapping and that this little kid is all he's known. And I think Brie Larson's character, and I think a reason why she's nominated, and I think rightfully so, is that she basically, in order to keep the kid as sane as possible, has basically fed him throughout growing up to keep him psychologically okay, a bunch of lies about how the world works, what the world is. The kid believes that room, he just calls it room, is the only place on earth that there's room, and then he says there's space, like you see out the skylight, the one outside thing to the world. And they have a TV in there, and they say that the TV are like flat people and not real, but like him and his mom are real, and Old Nick is real.
Yeah,
and that's the world to him. And yes, obviously, Shahir, when we were talking about before, like this on a conceptual level, living in the world we live in is totally damaging to a child.
It's psychological abuse, but it's not from her.
Right. She's the one that's basically staving it back. She's keeping it at bay. And the thing that I was brought to this entire time before we get to the second half of the film was the allegory of the cave. Are you familiar with that? It's a Plato allegory.
Yeah.
Where, and I'm gonna butcher the fuck out of this, but it's basically, okay, what if there was a race of men who have been chained to the wall of a cave their entire life, and they only see one area of light far away that is the shadows of other people walking.
Mm-hmm.
They would just think that they have to face forward. That's existence. Other things that exist, even they themselves, if they couldn't see themselves, would probably think they're one of these shadows. The world is all shadows. And then you let these people out of that scenario, and holy fuck. And there's a sort of an allegory of like, the reason he sort of does that is like human perception versus how the universe actually works.
Right.
That's the allegory of the cave.
And that's the way that Dogtooth works, which is about this family where they basically get told like the complete opposite of things. Like a VHS tape is called the sky, and a dog is called a bear, and they kind of do the and the psychological like warfare takes on slightly different shapes when their human relationships go slightly askew.
Sure.
And I think, you know, but is it abuse in this film? Not from Brie Larson's basically using this as a safety net for the kid to like explain why they don't go outside. And so it's not psychological torture abuse from her, but obviously the scenario in which he's in is abuse.
Because the goal is to eventually get out, which, spoiler, they do. And we'll get through sort of that, but like I think we'll get to that moment, I think. Well, actually, we could talk about that now. So this happens, and so you're kind of, the kid has a bunch of really wonderful narration of him sort of explaining how the world works in his head.
How the room works.
How room works, that's it. And there's some horrific things that happen, but again, it's from his perspective, and you don't quite know they're horrific. Like he sleeps in a cupboard.
Yeah.
And
as old Nick visits.
And basically rapes his mom, but like she doesn't put up a fight anymore to try to make it so that the baby is not, or the 5-year-old is not traumatized.
Yeah.
And the kid has a couple little ticks. Like he does, you said he's like the perfect child. He does flip out from time to time, as kids do. But,
you know, and then obviously there's, I'm going to jump ahead just slightly. When he eventually breaks free from the room, he's completely incapacitated with dealing with the world as we know it. He doesn't know how to cope with, and in fact, he wants to go back to the room.
So eventually they figure out this plan. Basically, his mom at one point, because he turns 5 and now she's trying to figure out how to get out of there, and she figures that now it's time to do it because he needs help, tries to come up with this plan to get them out. And she tries to explain to the kid that his name is Jack, I believe.
Yeah, Jack.
She tries to explain to Jack how the world actually works, and obviously there's a lot of backlash to that because
he doesn't. This is it. Well, it's also like breaking the safety net of the world that he knows. You know, like everything outside of him and his mother is, you know, like incompatible with his worldview at this point.
Right. They come up with this plan where he's going to act sick one time, and then when old Nick doesn't bring him to the ER, that's how they were going to try to do it first. She like writes him a note and all this other stuff. That she's going to wrap him in after the next day when old Nick says he'll come back with antibiotics because he won't bring her to the hospital because that would fuck up his whole rape plan.
Yeah.
He says that Brie Larson says that Jack died in the night because the reason he got a fever was because basically the entire time in there, whenever old Nick tries to interact with Jack, that's the only time that Brie Larson gets violent or fights back. Old Nick is his name, not old Jack.
Yeah.
And I think Robin actually pointed that out, and she thought that was that the portrayal of how old Nick dealt with the kid wasn't realistic. I actually thought it was, because old Nick's interaction with the kid, he kind of acts like he kind of wants to interact with the kid, but then Brie Larson's character just is like, no, absolutely not. And she basically kind of uses her defiance. I mean, obviously she can only defy him so far. She's been locked up for 7 years, but she can use the defiance being like, look, this won't be pleasant for either of us if you start dealing with this kid. Like, this kid is mine. Let me deal with him. So then when it comes time for this plan where she pretends that the kid died in the night due to her, basically old Nick freaks out at one point and cuts the power for them for one night in winter, and it gets really cold. Then she lies and says the kid got sick, and then when he doesn't bring him to the hospital, she basically makes his plan and practices his plan with her son to get rolled up in a carpet and stay stiff and act like he's dead so that then old Nick will have to go somewhere to bury him in his truck, and then escape along the way and find anyone he can find and give them this note and say, my mom is stuck here. And that happens. And that's one of the most tense moments in cinema I think I've seen in a very long time.
Yeah, I don't know about you, but I was just my heart was beating so fast during that scene, and I was like, I was just wondering, how is he going to get out of the scenario? I hope I just want him to make it. And to me, it's a really good example of setting the stakes.
Mm-hmm.
Like we don't know how dangerous old Nick is, but we know he's dangerous. But and the other thing is we know how fragile Jack is.
Yep.
And so we know, and like Brie Larson's character, the Ma has like laid out this plan. So we know exactly how the plan is supposed to work. And it was just when we know exactly what the stakes are, it does so much. And it's amazing because the stakes are so real as well. Like the scenario is so real. And I think one of the most amazing things about this film is how it takes such a charged scenario, like a woman who's been kidnapped for 7 years, and plays it from a child's point of view, and plays it. The thing that I am sort of most impressed by this film is how it really is more interested in the victims of a crime than it is the actual crime itself.
Yes, so let's talk about that, because so eventually he jumps out of the truck, he gets to a person, there's a whole thing, it's very tense, and finally old Nick runs away and the cops come and deal with it, and eventually through some very clever, very quick detective work find where Brie Larson's being held. And they rescue her as well. And then it moves to the second half of the movie, which is arguably, just as interesting. I 100% loved that this movie was not about catching old Nick.
No, he becomes incidental to the film.
They mention it once, how they think they got him and it might go to trial, but it never becomes this sort of societal thing we've all done with the Making of Murderers and the fucking serials, where it's like, and those have their place, but this is not a movie about that. And if you're looking for it in this movie, you will not get it. You'll find things much, much better. This is a movie about people trapped, one his entire life and another one for 7 years in a horrible condition, made the best of it, and now they're back in the world. And it's the equivalent, especially when the kid's going on his mission to escape. It's the equivalent of being torn out of reality. It's the equivalent of going into space when you don't know anything about space.
Yeah.
Like it's this total alien landscape, and then it's all of the social and family interaction afterward. Like Brie Larson's character's parents come, and it's all different. Like the mother's remarried, the father has his own issues. And it's just and then you keep getting these narrative monologues told as from Jack as the narrator, as how he sort of sees the world working.
Yeah, and it does an amazing thing, which is, so I mentioned The Lovely Bones earlier on, but it does this amazing thing, which is that it is about this family trying to regather itself after this horrible tragedy that has befallen them. And, I love me some crime movies, and I love me some serial killer movies, and films about psychologically damaged people committing crimes.
And we have a bunch of them.
We have a bunch of them. Like the thing that I think is interesting is this film is basically Prisoners from last year, but told from the point of view of the kids who have been kidnapped. If anyone saw Prisoners, this is basically the not looking at the psychological makeup of the person who did it, but rather what happens to the people after they've been, freed. So this is why I feel like this is the film that The Lovely Bones should have been. And, there's a couple of reviews which have criticized the movie. I'm looking at Mahola. I can never pronounce her name correctly, but Manola Dargis's review for the New York Times. Very, very well established.
What did she say?
She basically says that the film is phenomenal. It's great. It's a really amazing portrayal, but that the problem is that the first half of the film really delves into the psychology of this kid, and the second half of the film becomes therapy for the family, and with not a lot of narrative push. And I can kind of agree with that. I kind of somewhat felt that, as in not a lot. Once they've been freed, the film becomes about how they reintegrate themselves into their family. And there's not a lot of narrative drive, not as much as you have in the first half of the movie, which is that, where it's all about getting free and what are the steps we're going to take to do that. There's not a lot of where are we going to go from here kind of thing. It's more just about the little moments and trying to reintegrate yourself. And I can kind of agree with that, but then it's done so well. And it's, again, like we talked last week about The Revenant. The best moments in The Revenant are about small, like Hugh Glass, Leonardo DiCaprio's character, trying to navigate the small problems he has in life. The best things in this movie are about Jack, the young boy, trying to figure out how the world works after he's been through this incredibly traumatic experience.
And not even the world, like the small things we're talking about, like stairs. He doesn't know what stairs are or how to walk up or down stairs because he's never fucking done it.
And he's never talked to another adult other than his mother. So when he's confronted with his grandmother before, he talks through his mother to his grandmother.
Mm-hmm.
And then the amazing thing is that one thing that you forget about is that Brie Larson's character, Ma, as she's called in the film, is a victim as well. And she's played basically the protector of Jack the entire way through. But we realize when we go back to, when she gets taken back to her home, that she was 17 years old when she was kidnapped. And so she has lost 7 years of her life, and she's still a girl.
And what I really liked about it was how strong she basically turned herself into a bona fide superhero, protecting this kid for as long as she did.
Mother. Having had a kid recently, you realize every woman that has a child is 100%. A superhero.
So it's interesting because then once it's not a life or death situation protecting her child, I think you see this sort of in her character, she's able to then but actually start going through the motions of feeling the emotion of the entirety of the severity of what's actually happened to her.
Yeah, and it's
because for the last 5 of those 7 years, she's just put it in the back and just made sure she was okay, so the kid was okay.
We see hints of her like going through depressive states where she
Jack calls them in the room when they're still in the room. He calls them gone days.
Yeah, where she just sleeps.
Where she just sleeps the entire day.
Yeah, and who wouldn't? She basically has moments like that when she comes out, and it's just there's one moment in this film, like, again, as a new parent, this movie hit me very hard. Thank you, Steve. But there was one moment in this film that hit me like a ton of bricks. And I was crying when I heard it, and it made me reconsider everything I'd been thinking about. So a little backstory, just had a baby. I've said it a million times already.
Wait, but did you have a baby though?
Oh, I didn't have the baby. Like, I watched as the baby was born.
Clarifying.
And I'm not the one having to feed it all the time. But anyway, we talk, like my wife and I talk a little bit about like what we want our kid to be like, because at this point, he's only like 10 weeks old. He doesn't have much of a personality. He's just got things he needs, like milk and changing and sleeping. And so we're starting to think about what personality he might have. And, we talk a lot about what do we want this kid to be like? We want him to be ambitious. We want him to be smart. We want him to be thoughtful. And, like when it comes down to it, one of the most important things I want is for him to be kind. Because I think empathy is an important trait that we don't think about a lot and can have a lot of ramifications. But what I mean by kind is to have genuine empathy, which is to think through other people's feelings and how his actions might affect other people, or how he can help other people, or how, I think that's just an important character trait that I really want to instill in some point. And there's a line in this film that completely shattered everything I'd been thinking about, because the way I've described what I've just told you is a very optimistic view of the world.
I was going to tear it down in a second, but let's see if the film did it for you.
Yeah. It's a very optimistic view of the world, and it's a very, and I'm aware right away that there's a barrier to being complete. Like, there's a difference between being kind and being naive. And we don't want, I've never wanted him to be naive. But there's a line in this film, and I don't know if the line hit you like it hit me. Where do you know the line I'm talking about?
No, not yet.
The line is when it's after one of these depressive states that Brie Larson's character has, and she wakes up and she basically wants to pick a fight with anybody, and she's trying to get Jack to play with Lego, and suddenly her mother, Jack's grandmother, comes along saying, "You're being too forceful. You need to back off." And of course, and I immediately, I knew that she wasn't going to respond well to that, because it's like, I've looked after this kid for the last 5 years. He is my problem. Everything, I know how to look after this kid. And they get into an argument, and she says this one line. She says, "Well, maybe if you hadn't told me to be so kind, I wouldn't have helped the strangers. I wouldn't have tried to help the stranger with a sick dog," which is how she got kidnapped. She basically was duped into helping old Nick, who had a fake dog. And that line hit me like a ton of bricks, because she basically, it's a game that kids play with their parents, but it's this, she's basically blaming her mother for instilling too much kindness in her, and that's what caused her to get kidnapped. She was too naive. And when I heard that line, I suddenly, everything I'd been thinking about, with my son, and raising him to be kind and empathetic, suddenly was like, if the flip side of that is raising them to be naive and unaware of people's duplicity. And I suddenly was I was in this spiral of how do I raise him to be aware of people's duplicity, but not afraid of it, able to navigate the world where you realize people are out to harm you, but you should still not be afraid. And that moment just...
No, I can totally see that. So coming from, again, hey, listeners, I know you've heard me say this, but I don't have a kid.
Yeah.
But coming from, let's get a little personal. Let's do it. So I was raised, I'm a only child, and I think my parents did a very good job raising me. I mean, this sounds weird, but I like me. I think I'm an okay person. I obviously have faults, as I've probably demonstrated on the show. But one thing, I am incredibly glad my parents instilled in me, and also actually kind of from this line that she says in the movie about, well, maybe if you hadn't taught me to be so, whatever, is kind of a hindrance, is I find in my own personal life, again, not to the extreme of getting kidnapped per se, because my parents also sort of instilled in me this, this truth about people, but believe the best in people, but also be smart. As far as empathy is concerned, I think empathy is a great trait, but also you can take it too far when I was reading a study about this too. The more empathetic someone is, a lot of times in monetary or even sort of social successfulness, you in a weird way, you're less successful the more empathetic you are. And it's because, and I can kind of relate to this. This is something that I've been dealing with psychologically in my life for quite a while. I tend to take a lot of time, almost too long. Like, you should obviously, if you have a problem in your life and it's an important problem, you need to kind of go through it and you need to think about it and whatever. And I try to think about it a lot, but I also try to think about it from every person's or thing that has feelings angle in the entirety of the situation. And then I tend to not be able to make a decision because I am so caught up with how everyone will feel when that's not the best thing for whatever I'm doing.
Right.
So the point what I'm trying to make is empathy is great to a point. I think, and again, this is, hey, Shahir, here's some parent advice from someone who doesn't have a kid. I think the best way to deal with a child, and something that she kind of does in this film in a couple of varying ways. I mean, once they're out of the room or out of room, is you want to have a dash of all of this shit. Like, it can't just be 100% kind.
Yeah.
I don't know. No, and I know that's not what you're saying, but I just think, if there's one thing, honestly, if there's one thing I think would raise the best sort of kid, is when it comes to important things, 100% honesty.
Right. But that can be problematic as well.
I don't think it can.
Well, there are a number of, one of the studies we've been reading about is about the the capacity for lying is an important developmental developmental milestone for a kid. Like for a kid to be able to lie to you is actually really important because it shows them using a part of their brain.
Yeah.
That is very effective. And so
I'm not talking about honesty from their perspective, by the way.
Right.
I'm talking about you being honest with your kid. I'm not talking about the kid being honest with you, if that makes any sense.
Right. I mean, look, the theories of parenting are
all
vast and about, and it's amazing. I think the testament to the power of this movie is that it gets you asking that question.
Of course.
Like what is the best thing she could have done for this kid? And there is a brutal moment in this movie later on where Brie Larson's character basically has to go on a TV interview about what happened to her, and it's like when the interviewer asked this question, I was like, "You are the worst human being on the face of this planet."
Yeah,
but the question was, why didn't you give up the child? Why didn't you get Old Nick to like drop him in a hospital or, just get rid of the child so that it could have a better life? And Brie Larson's response is, well, what are you talking about? That's my kid. I would never give up my kid. And you realize the difficulty that happened is that the thing that's so rich in this scenario is that her character needs that kid and that kid needs her.
Yeah.
And it's this symbiotic relationship that is so profound. And the thing that becomes difficult when they leave the room is they no longer need each other as much because they're protected by the people around them now.
Sure.
And I like one of the
by society's normal rules.
Yeah, by society's normal rules. And we're gonna get personal again here, but I can see how empowering it is to have your baby be completely dependent on you. I can see how like it changes everything, like every decision you make becomes about the baby, and it's like you're empowered by that because it's like I have this important mission in life now to look after this kid,
sure,
to raise this kid as well as I can. And I can see what happens when I don't know how I'm going to respond to this, how my wife's going to respond to this, or how any human being responds to this. But as you get older, or as the child gets older, they start needing you less, which disempowers you. And it's it's a weird feeling. It's a shift in like all that power that you once had.
Well, I think that's one of the reasons in the film that Brie Larson's character, and I'm just going to call her Envy Adams from here on out because that's who I remember her as in Scott Pilgrim.
Oh, right. Yeah.
When Envy Adams finally has this interview with this woman that was a weird turning point for the film. And actually, if there's one stumbling point, I mean, the film needed at that point, at that 2/3 through the movie point, a push forward in a weird way. Yeah. I think that was a very heavy-handed push. And if I had any criticism about the movie, I feel like that moment in particular was not handled well. I don't know if it was the actress playing the reporter or how the script was written, but it was just very like...
I didn't mind the moment so much as...
I think it was a fine moment, and you can work that into your script however you want. There was just something about it that felt too like, come on, huh? Like getting punched in the face after such a nuanced film. Like all of a sudden, this is the punch in your face moment. I felt like it could have been massaged in the way the rest of the movie does all of this hard shit.
Yeah.
Much cleaner and better and taken me out of it less.
Yeah.
But so then at that point, it's kind of the culmination of, well, now that the world exists, she's no longer needed. Therefore, all of her strength is kind of not necessary at this point, other than for her own well-being. And as it goes further and further, I mean, it's kind of at this point, like you said, an allegory almost for a child getting older.
Yeah, that time when the child gets older and no longer needs you anymore.
Yeah, so, and then eventually in the film, she, after this interview and after the, questioning it, she begins to question her entire existence, this existence of 7 years locked in a fucking room. She tries to kill herself in a weird way.
Not in a weird way. She swallows a lot of pills.
Yeah. And they rescue her and she gets better, and there's a whole thing about, throughout there about Jack throughout, but it's kind of like, if her mission was to protect this kid and that's what kept her sane,
Yeah.
was protecting this kid, and now she no longer has to protect this kid. Now all these questions, now she has to start questioning her entire existence based on this capture for 7 years. Yeah, that's going to drive you to go to some dark fucking places.
If one among many things that are going to drive you to dark places.
Yeah. So it all makes narrative and human sense. And
I have a couple of criticisms, and these are minor criticisms. So before we go any further, and I said it before when we were in non-spoiler territory as well, this is a remarkable, heartbreaking movie that is very much worth anybody's time.
And also incredibly clever. Let's not sort of, I know we were talking about the emotional impact of this stuff, but the entire way this film is done and the way the script is written is some of the most clever writing I think you'll experience at the movies these days. It doesn't ever hold your hand, but it also...
But it's incredibly gentle.
But it gives you these lofty... It makes you think about lofty human emotional situations, responses, and states without making you realize you're thinking about them.
Yeah.
And that is something as a teaching tool and sort of teaching sort of how emotions sort of work and how you feel them. That's something that you don't get a lot. Like normally it's all heavy-handed and you kind of get taken out of it like, oh, that's bullshit or they're being too whatever.
There's a couple of bullshit moments in this movie.
Okay, well, you can get into that, but I was saying overall, I think it does a very good job at what it's trying to do.
It's excellent. Without further, as I say, it probably would have made my top 10 list very high on my top 10 list, alongside The Gift, which was my number one from last year.
So now that we said all the things we like it, let's tear it to shit.
Let's tear it apart. I felt the scene where where Jack runs away and meets another human being for the first time was handled in such an odd way, like because everything about that scene reads like a dad who's having difficulty with a problem child, but the guy that he runs into sort of immediately seems to sense that something is wrong and like hangs around in the weirdest way, like, oh, is that note for me? Like it was kind of
the writing of it is very, and I don't know if that was
it works, but it's awkward.
I think it's awkward, but I would think when I watched it, and again, that felt out of place to me, but I also think that it was meant to feel.
It's not a deal breaker.
No, but I think I think that was a legitimate choice, not just we got this bad ADR person to do this shit, read it poorly. I think it's supposed to feel stilted. It's supposed to feel weird. It's supposed to feel a little not quite the correct human interaction, because that's exactly what what Jack would be experiencing. He's had real human interactions with his mother.
Yeah.
This is the first interaction with a
and he's almost catatonic, like he doesn't know how to speak.
But like it's all very simple stuff that straight like, hey, is this okay, hello little girl.
Yeah.
Oh, hey, is that note for me? What's going on here?
Yeah.
Like it's very like it's like Peanuts womp 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 womp. And I think that was a very deliberate move. I don't know if it worked as the filmmaker was trying to intend it to, but I think I can't see that being a mistake.
It's not fumbled. It's kind of the choice that they made, but it's an odd choice, and it feels a little, just to me, it feels awkward.
Sure.
And then, it kind of leads into the scene with Jack and a police officer that is, we talked about last week about conveniences.
Yes.
This is one of those narrative, slightly too convenient, because the thing that was going in my brain, but again, like the effectiveness of this whole sequence is so good that even though this was happening, the thing that was going in my brain was like, oh my God, this cop has got to figure this out as quickly as possible because Nick is going back to the house to kill the mother.
That's what I thought too.
Like so as much as like I wanted this, what happened, and as much as I'm about to describe it as kind of like convenient, I did want it to happen because I was so concerned about what was happening on the other side of this equation. But a cop basically figures out exactly where Brie Larson is, where the room is, based off of like a description that Jack gives, very just sort of incidentally, that there were 3 stops and I had to wait till the third stop.
Well, it's nice, but like that, it's funny you brought up the coincidence. I thought you were going to bring up something else. The coincidence of the cop coming right as the dog walker guy saw the whole thing going down. I thought that was too coincidency, but sure.
I thought there'd been like a little bit of a time delay, because I think the dog walker had called the cop, and then there'd been like a time. I thought there'd been like some time in a life.
Because the reason and it was very clever police work. In fact, it didn't bother me, the police work that they did. So he stumbles through and Jack says 3 stops.
Yeah.
So there's 3 stop signs between where they were and where he came from. Okay, that limits your radius. Plus the cops saw or maybe the dog walker reported a red truck. Okay, so there's a red truck.
No, it all makes sense.
And Jack said that there was a skylight where he was being held.
Yeah.
So then they just had to literally go to Google Earth in that area, look for when a red truck is in a place where a shed has a skylight, and you can call it a day.
Yeah, but that's kind of like Sherlock Holmes detective work for beat cops that pick up this,
Are you saying lady cops can't be like Sherlock Holmes, Shahir?
I'm saying like Sherlock Holmes and when was the last time you saw Sherlock Holmes in your local cop who came and picked you up for a local domestic?
Don't know.
So it felt a little like contrived, but again, I was on board.
Sure.
And then this is an odd criticism that I'm going to have of the film, which is that
not enough umlauts in the director's name.
I wish there was. Well, actually, am I?
No, not enough.
Yeah,
not
that
enough
might actually
umlauts.
be true because the writer I'm going to compare him to is Asghar Farhadi, the Iranian writer who I talked about last time, who wrote a film, A Separation. Now, the reason I want to mention A Separation and his other film, The Past, is that he's the kind of writer who takes a scenario like this and mines it in every possible direction. And I was kind of, when we got to the second half of this film, it kind of becomes a one-track film about healing. And that's fine. And it's done beautifully and it's handled really well. But I guess part of me, and this is not an appropriate critical response, like as an audience member, this is a response of if I was producing the film or if I was involved in the writing of the film.
Sure.
And what I'm about to propose is not practical in any way, shape, or form. But I was kind of like sitting there asking a lot of questions about what happens to a woman when she comes back into society like this. How does she get a job? What does she do for money? What happens if the old Nick decides to file for paternity of the kid? Like how does all of this work? And I felt like there was so much rich material to be mined here because the scenario was so potent. And it reminded me, like, the other film I kept on thinking about was Liliane Cavani's film, The Night Porter, which is about a woman who survives a Holocaust camp and comes back to Auschwitz to fall in love. She fell in love with her captor. And I didn't think, I'm not suggesting that this film should go down that road, but what I'm saying is that film basically took like something horrific and tried to explore another side of it. And I feel like this film doesn't do that, and which is why I kind of think about the New York Times review being, about it being just a therapy film at the end. Now that's not a problem because it does it so well and it is so good. But I kind of wondered, like, there's a million directions you can take this second half, and you can explore so much. Like,
well, those particular directions you just laid out about getting a job or whatever, and if Nick filed for paternity or like any of that shit sounds A, so boring, or B, just insane.
No, I see. I think you're wrong there because I think the writing is so good that they could find the trauma. And here's the thing: is that here's my point about that is that this feels like a film that has 2 acts, and they're very good. Acts 1 and 2 are excellent. I just kind of wondered what could be a third act for this film.
Well, I feel like all of those things you're describing, I've seen done competently before.
Have you seen a film where a kidnapper tries to file paternity?
Well, no, Shahir, but that would never. I mean, not that movies have to have things that happen, but like that's insane because he filed for paternity and then goes straight to fucking jail.
There are weirder things that have happened, and there are much weirder stories that have happened. Like, you don't only have to look at Netflix making a murderer to find weirder things in life happening.
Yeah, but that's something that's so fucking. You want to talk about contrived, and almost that would even come off as like not writer's convenience.
It might. You're right. It might very well derail the film into.
It feels so dumb to me.
No, let's not be mean here.
No. But like, if I'm not saying the idea of thinking about that is dumb. I'm saying if a filmmaker was to make a film like that or do, I think there's nothing. I mean, I can fucking straight up tell you, yeah, we could have great characters and interesting conversations or whatever, but that's fucking dumb. Like, if the kidnapper of 7 years comes back and files paternity for the kid they fathered.
I'm not saying that the kidnapper would, like, get paternity, but I'm saying, like, what happens when Brie Larson is forced to have to confront that person again? Like, what happens?
That could be in court. We've seen that a million times. Like,
I just think that's interesting to me, and I think,
but
here's the thing.
We've seen it before. This is a thing about sort of healing that I've never seen done this well before, and I'm glad they stay on it.
And I'm glad they stay on it, and I think it's a great Act 1 and Act 2. I kind of wondered if there could be an Act 3 to this film. Now, again, I'm saying this with an overarching. This is. The Act 1 and 2 of this are excellent, and they're, like, maybe you could try writing this and it would be terrible, and you'd go back to what you had here. But it was just kind of an exploration game, because there was a moment later on in the film where they were talking about where Jack's talking about, now that we don't live in room anymore, we've decided that that we should try everything, that we need to go live our lives. And I was like, well, how does that actually work? Because, for example, in a case where, like, there's gross negligence of the state, for example, you could be a person like Brie Larson's character could be entitled to a cash settlement or payment in order to live her life. But she was kidnapped by another human being who probably doesn't have any money or anything like that. So the abuse that's done to her doesn't just extend past the room. It extends after she leaves the room.
Of course.
And so the thing that I was curious about was, how does she integrate herself into life? Like, can she get a job? No, I don't think she can.
We've seen those again. I have to go back to
Have we seen those movies?
Not in this exact situation, but it's the same shit with veterans. It's the same shit with any of the stuff. Any sort of coming home after doing a thing, either a long time hard with your will or against your will, like coming back into society. Yeah, it's gonna be fucking hard to get a job. Yeah, money's gonna be an issue.
But
in this movie, they do a great job. They do a phenomenal job, basically setting you up and telling the audience straight up, either visually or through the story, to be like, this is not what this is about. This is all taken care of. She's back with her mother. She's gonna live with her mother for however long it takes.
Forever?
Or whatever.
Yeah. Look, I'm not saying what they do is bad, and I'm not saying what I'm suggesting is good. What I'm asking the question about is, could this film, like to me, the film, it is a beautiful example of a film that, like, starts in one place and then blossoms and opens up.
Sure.
And I guess what I'm asking is, it blossoms up to an extent and to a point which is about Jack and the mother reconnecting with each other, and that's fine. It's a beautiful story. I just wonder, could this blossom even further? And the reason I mention Asghar Farhadi is that he is a writer that, like, takes, like, the stories he tells are so beautifully done. They go so far, and they basically, it's that thing which he does so well, which is that he writes drama like action movies, which is that there's a continuing escalation and a continuing movement happening. And I felt like this film, as brilliant as it is, and again, this is my one criticism, is I wondered if it could move even further. Could it be, like, this film is doing very well for itself, but could it go even further? That was my question mark.
I mean, for me, just on a personal note, I think, yeah, you can push anything further, and you could do it incredibly well if you wanted to. I mean, you could look at the film Boyhood, right?
Yeah.
Look at Boyhood, and that movie just goes and goes and goes and goes and goes. And arguably, it for all of its goings, it does it all very well.
I'm not a fan of Boyhood.
I'm not either, but not because of what I'm watching moment to moment, but because it doesn't know when to shut the fuck up. Like, it doesn't know when its own story is done.
Yeah, but
now, hold on, let me just finish my thought. So in that scenario, I wish it ended sooner.
Right.
Here, I'm glad it ended where it ended, because, to use your flower, I'll finish with your flower analogy, but it ended at the exact point that I felt that A, I thought it was going to go, B, where I think the story had the most poignancy and sort of meaning behind it, because then it's just going to eventually turn into, and to use your flower analogy, it blossomed into something crazy. But in the life cycle of a flower, what's next after blossoming?
It's going to wilt.
It's going to wilt and die.
Yeah.
We've already had in this film, in the story, the dark times.
Yeah.
I don't need it to go up and then end on a down note. For me, for the story, and I don't think that's what they're trying to tell, or else they would have. I think it's wonderful to see sort of a movie like this where it does have a finite ending. They know when to finish it to get across the best way possible the points that they're trying to make. Could they do what you're describing? Sure. Personally, I'm very glad they didn't, for the same reasons that I'm very glad they didn't make it about catching Nick.
Yeah, no, and I think because the way you're describing it there is where the blossoming of the flower goes beyond what the film is about. And I would be very hesitant to take the film in another direction. I'm just suggesting that the second, there's a part of me that agrees with the New York Times review, which is that the second half of the film becomes very straightforward, very one note, and I kind of know where it's going. And I'm not saying that's a bad thing.
I was going to ask you, did that take away from your enjoyment of the movie?
No, not at all.
Then it just in my head, instantly that review is kind of bullshit, because if you still enjoy it and you're still really liking the movie, then why are we being like, well, the movie could be this?
No, well, because it, on the one hand, I feel like the movie has the capacity. Right now it's great. I feel like the movie has the capacity to be amazing, and it's just a question mark I have, and I would want to explore where you could go further with this story. Now they do a beautiful job at like ending this on a really poignant note. Basically, Jack says, "Can we revisit the room?" And they do this amazing thing, which I've done in my life as well, which is like. I remember revisiting my old primary school. We call it primary school in New Zealand. And you suddenly, like, when you were there, it looked so big and huge. And then you suddenly revisit it and it's small and it's strange. And you realize.
I actually just did that this Christmas. I was in a house from when I was 1 to 5 in a place called Tingsboro, Massachusetts.
Yeah.
And we went back because we were going to a card game at my dad's friend's house.
Yeah.
And he lived right near there. And we drove by. I'm like, I haven't been back to the old Tingsboro house since we moved. I'm like, can you show it to me? And my dad drove me by it. It looked so different than my memory. It looked small and weird,
and it's not yours anymore.
Yeah,
and that's what happens in this film. Jack goes back to room.
Yep.
And he says
this isn't room anymore.
Yeah, this isn't room anymore, because room is where you and I live.
Yeah.
And now we live and he
says it's because the door opened, actually. He says that in the movie. It's like, oh, because the door's open now. It's not room.
Yeah, and it's because I was like, she says, "Do you want me to close it?" And I was like, "For the love of God, please don't close that door again." And he's like, "No, it's okay."
Yeah.
And I was like, "Oh my God, that's so good." This is an amazing film because it's about something so horrific, but it's surprisingly upbeat. And so, we talked last week about The Revenant, and we talked a little bit about how you have to be really in the mood for that film because it's such a. It can feel like such a downer. This film, if you pitched your friends to go see this movie, it's about a woman who's been kidnapped for 7 years, breaking free and living her life again. That sounds like a downer kind of film, but it's not. This is a triumphant movie. It's about it is. This movie leaves you so high at the end of it that and that's kind of an amazing feat into itself.
Of course. I mean, Revenant, Canadian Batman Begins, is all about revenge.
Yeah.
And this movie is about the exact opposite. This movie is about moving forward. This movie is about not being consumed by the fucking terrors that happened to you previously in your life and moving forward. And I think it does a really, really, really good job at it.
I mean, we haven't reviewed it yet, but another reader mentioned that they'd gone to see, Stephen Press, fan of the show, who's written into us, had told us that they'd just gone to see Spotlight recently and was really excited about Spotlight. I can read you just a few lines. Basically saying that it took him back to the days in the newsroom, and it reminded him of the difference between daily news and investigative news. And it was a great movie. And the conversation that's been going around Spotlight is how under-directed it feels. It doesn't feel, in
a good way.
Yeah, and this I think Room does a similar thing, which is that its direction is never showy, but it's masterfully directed. Lenny Abrahamson puts the camera exactly where it needs to be at every moment. He cuts at the right moment. He deals with performances in the exact right way. It just never, it's never showy. And The Revenant, for example, is a film that feels directed.
It feels super showy.
Yeah, it feels very showy. But this is a film that feels you never feel the hand of the director at any point,
Right.
but it just,
Yeah.
but every moment has more emotional impact than
Sure.
than anything in The Revenant.
Sure.
So it's a real testament to like the power of good directing, which is that it,
Look,
like great editing, it's almost invisible.
I was going to say, a lot of times in this business, if you can't tell that your job was done, then you did a fucking great job.
And this person, and like it's it's a good lesson for me because I know when I'm directing, I'm always like, oh, what's the one shot I can show that I can?
How
really...
can I make this look like Shahir Dowd made it?
Yeah, exactly. And it's like
I ask myself that question every day.
Yeah, Matt Kroll's in the editing room, like, what would Shahir do?
What would Shahir do?
Yeah, WWSD.
More umlauts. Anyway, we're running out of time. Final thought. Just one sentence because we've kind of just gone back and forth. What do you think?
Sublime movie. My criticism has nothing to do with the movie at hand.
It seems like your criticism is almost a compliment in the sense that it's curiosity.
It's curiosity about where you could go further with the story. So please don't take it as a negative on the film as much as it's as a positive, on the film. As a new parent, Stephen, this was devastating, but thank you for getting me to watch it because it was a powerful experience. Please, Stephen, watch Nobody Knows as a return favor.
There you go. Yeah, I mean, I think I've said everything I want to say. It's a brilliant movie. You should watch it. You should watch it. You should watch it. And
you wicka watch it.
Yeah, wicka wow. And I'm kind of psyched that Envy Adams might get an Oscar. I don't know.
She's been. I mean, look, she was in Short Term 12 last year, which was pretty. She's been touted as the new it girl,
and she's also the lead singer of Clash at Demon Head. So let's not forget the important things.
Of
Shahir.
What?
Never mind.
All right. That's a Scott Pilgrim thing. I need to watch that movie again.
Yeah, you need to actually pay attention to it because it's wonderful. Anyway, this has been the only podcast about Room. And we didn't even talk. I'm proud of us. We didn't do more we didn't do a fake,
more jokes about
the room joke. And I think that's a testament to how good Room is. We weren't like, all right, so Lisa is Tommy's boyfriend, but then Johnny or whoever whatever.
You're tearing me apart.
We only did one. So
it's the same one.
Yeah, Shahir, where can people find you when you're not being curious about films?
I'm always curious about films at www.shahirdaud.com, which is SHAHIRDAUD.com. Matt Kroll and I have a Gmail account, which you can email us in at onlymoviepodcast@gmail.com. Call out my bullshit ideas about how we could extend this film. Let us know other films you'd like us to see and talk about. We have a Twitter handle at onlymoviepod as well. And if you can, please go to iTunes and give us a review. We, as Matt always says, we like them 5 stars, but we'll take the ones.
I'll take the one. I'd love to, and we'll read them. We'll read your reviews on here. So
so let that be a listen to you. If you say some shit, we're gonna say it out loud.
Well, I mean that might be a bonus. Yeah, you can find me at MatthewKroll.com. That's MatthewKroll.com. Also, Skeletor, 4 PREZ on Instagram, and Emperor MSK on Twitter. And yeah, this has been the only podcast about Room. And since we showed so much restraint in our joking about the movie Room and The Room, the Tommy Wiseau.
We gotta do that movie.
No.
Yes, we have to do it.
We can go see it.
No, we have to talk
All
about
right.
it.